Continuation of Pollyanna. Chapter 7. Pollyanna and the Punishments. At 1:30, Timothy drove Miss Polly and her niece to the 4 and 5 principal dry goods stores, which were about half a mile from the homestead. Fitting Pollyanna with a new wardrobe proved to be more or less of an exciting experience for all concerned. Miss Polly came out of it with the feeling of limp relaxation that one might have at finding oneself at last on solid earth after a perilous walk across the very thin crust of a volcano. The various clerks who had waited upon the pair came out of it with very red faces and enough amusing stories of Pollyanna to keep their friends in gales of laughter for the rest of the week. Pollyanna herself came out of it with radiant smiles and a heart content, whereas she expressed it to one of the clerks, "When you haven't had anybody but missionary barrels and ladies' aiders to dress you, it is perfectly lovely to just walk right in and buy clothes that are brand new and that don't have to be tucked up or let down because they don't fit." This shopping expedition consumed the entire afternoon, then one supper and delightful talk with old Tom in the garden, and another with Nancy on the back porch after the dishes were done and while Aunt Polly paid a visit to a neighbor. Old Tom told Pollyanna wonderful things of her mother that made her very happy indeed, and Nancy told her all about the little farm 6 miles away at the Corners, where lived her own dear mother and her equally dear brother and sisters. She promised, too, that sometime, if Miss Polly were willing, Pollyanna should be taken to see them. "And they've got lovely names, too. You'll like their names," sighed Nancy. "They're Algernon and Florabelle and Estelle, and I just hate Nancy." "Oh, Nancy, what a dreadful thing to say! Why?" "Because it isn't pretty like the others. You see, I was the first baby and Mother hadn't begun to read so many stories with the pretty names in 'em then." "But I love Nancy, just because it's you," declared Pollyanna. "Humph! Well, I guess you could love Clarissa Mabel just as well," retorted Nancy, "and it would be a heap happier for me. I think that name's just grand." Pollyanna laughed. "Well, anyhow," she chuckled, "it isn't Hephzibah." "Hephzibah? Yes, Mrs. White's name is that. Her husband calls her Hep, and she doesn't like it. She says when he calls her Hep, Hep, she feels just as if the next minute he was going to yell hurrah, and she doesn't like to be hurrahed at." Nancy's gloomy face relaxed into a broad smile. "Well, if you don't beat the Dutch. Say, do you know, I shan't never hear Nancy now that I don't think of that Hep Hep and giggle. My, I guess I'm glad." She stopped short and turned amazed eyes on the little girl. "Say, Miss Pollyanna, do you mean, was you playing that game then, about my being glad I wasn't named Hephzibah?" Pollyanna frowned. Then she laughed. "Why, Nancy, that's so. I was playing the game, but that's one of the times I just did it without thinking, I reckon. You see, you do, lots of times. You get so used to it. Looking for something to be glad about, you know. And most likely there is something about everything that you can be glad about if you keep hunting long enough to find it." "Well, maybe," granted Nancy, with open doubt. At 8:30, Pollyanna went up to bed. The screens had not yet come, and the close little room was like an oven. With longing eyes, Pollyanna looked at the 2 fast-closed windows, but she did not raise them. She folded her clothes neatly and said her prayers, blew out her candle, and climbed into bed. Just how long she lay in sleepless misery, tossing from side to side in the hot little cot, she did not know, but it seemed to her that it must have been hours before she finally slipped out of bed, felt her way across the room, and opened her door. Out in the main attic all was velvet blackness, save where the moon flung a path of silver halfway across the floor from the east dormer window. With a resolute ignoring of that fearsome darkness to the right and the left, Pollyanna drew a quick breath and patted straight into that silvery path and onto the window. She had hoped vaguely that this window might have a screen, but it did not. Outside, however, there was a wide world of fairy-like beauty, and there was, too, she knew, fresh, sweet air that would feel so good to the hot cheeks and her hands. As she stepped nearer and peered longingly out, she saw something else. She saw only a little way below the window the wide, flat tin roof of Miss Polly's sun parlor. The sight filled her with longing. If only now she were out there. Fearfully she looked behind her. Back there, somewhere, were her hot little room and her still hotter bed, but between her and them lay a horrid desert of blackness across which one must feel one's way with outstretched, shrinking arms, while before her, out on the sun parlor roof, were the moonlight and the cool, sweet night air. If only her bed were out there, and folks did sleep out of doors. Joel Hartley at home, who was so sick with the consumption, had to sleep out of doors. Suddenly Pollyanna remembered that she had seen near this attic window a row of long white bags hanging with nails. Nancy had said that they contained the winter clothing put away for the summer. A little fearful now, Pollyanna felt her way to those bags, selected a nice fat, soft one. It contained Miss Polly's sealskin coat for a bed, and a thinner one to be doubled up for a pillow, and still another which was so thin it seemed almost empty for a covering. Thus equipped, Pollyanna, in high glee, pattered to the moonlit window again, raised the sash, stuffed the burden through to the roof below, and then let herself down after it, closing the window carefully behind her. Pollyanna had not forgotten those flies with the marvelous feet that carried things. How deliciously cool it was! Pollyanna quite danced up and down with delight, drawing in long, full breaths of the refreshing air. The tin roof under her feet crackled with little resounding snaps that Pollyanna rather liked. She walked, indeed, 2 or 3 times back and forth from end to end. It gave her such a pleasant sensation of airy space after her hot little room, and the roof was so broad and flat that she had no fear of falling off. Finally, with a sigh of content, she curled herself up on a sealskin coat mattress, arranged one bag for a pillow and the other for a covering, and settled herself to sleep. "I'm so glad now that the screens didn't come," she murmured, blinking up at the stars, "else I couldn't have had this." Downstairs in Miss Polly's room, next the sun parlor, Miss Polly herself was hurrying into the dressing-gown and slippers by her bed, her face white and frightened. A minute before she had been telephoning in a shaking voice to Timothy. "Come up quick, you and your father. Bring lanterns. Somebody is on the roof of the sun parlor. He must have climbed up the rose trellis or somewhere, and of course he can get right into the house through the east window in the attic. I have locked the attic door down here, but hurry quick." Some time later Pollyanna just dropped off to sleep, was startled by a lantern flash and a trio of amazed ejaculations. She opened her eyes to find Timothy at the top of a ladder near her, old Tom just getting through the window, and her aunt peering out at her from behind him. "Pollyanna, what does this mean?" cried Aunt Polly then. Pollyanna blinked sleepy eyes and sat up. "Why, Mr. Tom, Aunt Polly," she stammered. "Don't look so scared. It isn't that I've got the consumption, you know, like Joel Hartley. It's only that I was so hot in there. But I shut the window, Aunt Polly, so the flies couldn't carry those germs things in." Timothy disappeared suddenly down the ladder. Old Tom, with almost equal precipitation, handed his lantern to Miss Polly and followed his son. Miss Polly bit her lip hard until the men were gone, and then she said sternly, Pollyanna, hand those things to me at once, and come in here. Of all the extraordinary children," she ejaculated a little later, as, with Pollyanna by her side and the lantern in her hand, she turned back into the attic. To Pollyanna the air was all the more stifling after that cool breath of the out-of-doors. But she did not complain. She only drew a long quivering sigh. At the top of the stairs Miss Polly jerked out crisply, "For the rest of the night, Pollyanna, you are to sleep in my bed with me. The screens will be here tomorrow. But until then I consider it my duty to keep you where I know you are safe." Pollyanna drew in her breath. "With you? In your bed?" she cried rapturously. "Oh, Aunt Polly, how perfectly lovely of you! And when I've so wanted to sleep with someone that belonged to me, you know, not a lady's aider. I've had them. My, I reckon I'm glad now those screens didn't come. Wouldn't you be?" There was no reply, and Miss Polly was stalking on ahead. Miss Polly, to tell the truth, was feeling curiously helpless. For the third time since Pollyanna's arrival, Miss Polly was punishing Pollyanna, and for the third time she was being confronted with the amazing fact that her punishment was being taken as a special reward of merit. No wonder Miss Polly was feeling curiously helpless. Chapter 8. Pollyanna Pays a Visit. It was not long before life at the Harrington homestead settled into something like order, though not exactly the order that Miss Polly had at first prescribed. Pollyanna sewed, practiced, read aloud, and studied cooking in the kitchen. It is true, but she did not give to any of these things quite so much time as had first been planned. She had more time also to just live, as she expressed it, for almost all of every afternoon from 2 until 6 o'clock was hers to do with as she liked, provided she did not like to do certain things already prohibited by Aunt Polly. It is a question perhaps whether all this leisure time was given to the child as a relief to Pollyanna from work, or as a relief to Aunt Polly from Pollyanna. Certainly, as those first July days passed, Miss Polly found occasion many times to ejaculate, "What an extraordinary child!" And certainly the reading and sewing lessons found her at their conclusion, each day somewhat dazed and wholly exhausted. Nancy in the kitchen fared better. She was not dazed nor exhausted. Wednesdays and Saturdays came to be, indeed, red-letter days to her. There were no children in the immediate neighborhood of the Harrington homestead for Pollyanna to play with. The house itself was on the outskirts of the village, and though there were other houses not far away, they did not chance to contain any boys or girls near Pollyanna's age. This, however, did not seem to disturb Pollyanna in the least. "Oh, no, I don't mind it at all," she explained to Nancy. "I'm happy just to walk around and see the streets and the houses and watch the people. I just love people, don't you, Nancy?" "Well, I can't say I do. All of 'em," retorted Nancy tersely. Almost every pleasant afternoon found Pollyanna begging for an errand to run, so that she might be off for a walk in one direction or another, and it was on these walks that frequently she met the man. To herself, Pollyanna always called him the man, no matter if she met a dozen other men the same day. The man often wore a long black coat and a high silk hat, two things that the just men never wore. His face was clean-shaven and rather pale. His hair, showing below his hat, was somewhat gray. He walked erect, rather rapidly, and he was always alone, which made Pollyanna vaguely sorry for him. Perhaps it was because of that she one day spoke to him. "How do you do, sir? Isn't this a nice day?" she called cheerily as she approached him. The man threw a hurried glance about him and then stopped uncertainly. "Did you speak to me?" he asked in a sharp voice. "Yes, sir," beamed Pollyanna. "I say, it's a nice day, isn't it?" "Huh? Oh, he grunted and strode on again. Pollyanna laughed. He was such a funny man, she thought. The next day she saw him again. "'Tisn't quite so nice as yesterday, but it's pretty nice," she called out cheerfully. "Huh? Oh, grunted the man as before, and once again Pollyanna laughed happily. When for the third time Pollyanna accosted him in much the same manner, the man stopped abruptly. "See here, child, who are you, and why are you speaking to me every day?" "I'm Pollyanna Whittier, and I thought you looked lonesome. I'm so glad you stopped. Now we're introduced. Only I don't know your name yet." "Well, of all the man did not finish his sentence, but strode on faster than ever. Pollyanna looked after him with a disappointed droop in her usually smiling lips. Maybe he didn't understand, but that was only half an introduction. "I don't know his name yet," she murmured, as she proceeded on her way. Pollyanna was carrying calf-foot jelly to Mrs. Snow today. Miss Polly Harrington always sent something to Mrs. Snow once a week. She said she thought that it was her duty, inasmuch as Mrs. Snow was poor, sick, and a member of her church. It was the duty of all the church members to look out for her, of course. Miss Polly did her duty by Mrs. Snow usually on Thursday afternoons, not personally, but through Nancy. Today Pollyanna begged the privilege, and Nancy had promptly given it to her in accordance with Miss Polly's orders. "And it's glad that I am to get rid of it," Nancy had declared in private afterwards to Pollyanna. "Though it's a shame to be tucking the job off on her. Poor lamb, so it is, so it is." "But I'd love to do it, Nancy." "Well, you won't, after you've done it once," predicted Nancy sourly. "Why not?" "Because nobody does. If folks wasn't sorry for her, there wouldn't a soul go near her from morning till night. She's that cantankerous. All this I pity her daughter, what has to take care of her." "But why, Nancy?" Nancy shrugged her shoulders. "Well, in plain words, it's just that nothing whatever has happened right in Miss Snow's life. Even the days of the week aren't run to her mind. If it's Monday, she's bound to say she wished 'twas Sunday, and if you take her jelly, you're pretty sure to hear her want chicken. But if you did bring her chicken, she'd be just hankering for lamb broth." "Why, what a funny woman," laughed Pollyanna. "I think I shall like to go to see her. She must be so surprising and different. I love different folks." "Humph! Well, Miss Snow's different, all right. I hope for the sake of the rest of us," Nancy had finished grimly. Pollyanna was thinking of these remarks today as she turned in at the gate of the shabby little cottage. Her eyes were quite sparkling indeed at the prospect of meeting this different Mrs. Snow. A pale-faced, tired-looking young girl answered her knock at the door. "How do you do?" began Pollyanna politely. "I am from Miss Polly Harrington, and I'd like to see Mrs. Snow, please." "Well, if you would, you're the first one that ever liked to see her," muttered the girl under her breath, but Pollyanna did not hear this. The girl had turned and was leading the way through the hall to a door at the end of it. In the sick room, after the girl had ushered her in and closed the door, Pollyanna blinked a little before she could accustom her eyes to the gloom, and she saw, dimly outlined, a woman half sitting up in bed across the room. Pollyanna advanced at once. "How do you do, Mrs. Snow? Aunt Polly says she hopes you are comfortable today, and she sent you some calf's foot jelly." "Dear me, jelly," murmured a fretful voice. "Of course, I'm very much obliged, but I was hoping 'twould be lamb broth today." Pollyanna frowned a little. "Why, I thought it was chicken you wanted when folks brought you jelly," she said. "What?" The sick woman turned sharply. "Why, nothing much," apologized Pollyanna hurriedly. "Of course, it doesn't really make any difference. It's only that Nancy said it was chicken you wanted when we brought jelly, and lamb broth when we brought chicken. Maybe 'twas the other way, and Nancy forgot." The sick woman pulled herself up till she sat erect in the bed. A most unusual thing for her to do, though Pollyanna did not know this. "Well, Miss Impertinence, who are you?" she demanded. Pollyanna laughed gleefully. "Oh, that isn't my name, Mrs. Snow, And I'm so glad 'tisn't too. That would be worse than Hephzibah, wouldn't it? I'm Pollyanna Whittier, Miss Polly Harrington's niece, and I've come to live with her. That's why I'm here with the jelly this morning. Very well, thank you. Your aunt is very kind, of course, but my appetite isn't very good this morning, and I was wanting lamb. She stopped suddenly, and then went on with an abrupt change of the subject. I never slept a wink last night. Not a wink. Oh dear, I wish I didn't, sighed Pollyanna, placing the jelly on the little stand and seating herself comfortably in the nearest chair. You lose such a lot of time just sleeping, don't you think so? Lose time sleeping? Exclaimed the sick woman. Yes, when you might be just living, you know. It seems such a pity we can't live nights too. Once again the woman pulled herself erect in her bed. Well, if you ain't the amazing young one, she cried. Here, do you go to that window and pull up the curtain, she directed. I should like to know what you look like. Pollyanna rose to her feet, but she laughed a little ruefully. Oh dear, then you'll see my freckles, won't you? She sighed, as she went to the window. And just when I was being so glad it was dark you couldn't see 'em. There, now you can— Oh! She broke off excitedly as she turned back to the bed. I'm so glad you wanted to see me because now I can see you. They didn't tell me you were so pretty. Me? Pretty? Scoffed the woman bitterly. Why, yes, didn't you know it? Cried Pollyanna. Well, no, I didn't, retorted Mrs. Snow dryly. Mrs. Snow had lived 40 years, and 15 of those years she had been too busy wishing things were different to find much time to enjoy things as they were. Oh, but your eyes are so big and dark, and your hair's all dark too and curly, cooed Pollyanna. I love black curls. That's one of the things I'm going to have when I get to heaven. And you've got 2 little red spots in your cheeks. Why, Mrs. Snow, you are pretty. I should think you'd know it when you looked at yourself in the glass. The glass? Snapped the sick woman, falling back on her pillow. Yes, well, I haven't done much primping before the mirror these days, and you wouldn't if you was flat on your back as I am. Why, no, of course not, agreed Pollyanna sympathetically. But wait, just let me show you, she exclaimed, skipping over to the bureau and picking up a small hand glass. On the way back to the bed, she stopped, eyeing the sick woman with a critical gaze. I reckon maybe, if you don't mind, I'd like to fix your hair just a little before I let you see it, she proposed. May I fix your hair, please? Why, I suppose so, if you want to, permitted Mrs. Snow grudgingly, but 'twon't stay, you know. Oh, thank you. I love to fix people's hair, exulted Pollyanna, carefully laying down the hand glass and reaching for a comb. I shan't do much today, of course. I'm in such a hurry, for you see how pretty you are, but some day I'm going to take it all down and have a perfectly lovely time with it, she cried, touching with soft fingers the lovely hair above the sick woman's forehead. For 5 minutes Pollyanna worked swiftly, deftly, combing a curl into fluffiness, perking up a drooping ruffle at the neck, or shaking a pillow into plumpness, so that the head might have a little pose. Meanwhile the sick woman, frowning and openly scoffing at the whole procedure, was, in spite of herself, beginning to tingle with a feeling perilously near to excitement. There! Panted Pollyanna, hastily plucking a pink from a vase nearby and tucking it into the dark hair where it would give the best effect. Now I reckon you're ready to be looked at. And she held out the mirror in triumph. Humph, grunted the sick woman, eyeing her reflection severely. I like red pinks better than pink ones. But then it'll fade, anyhow, before night, so what's the difference? But I should think you'd be glad they did fade, laughed Pollyanna, 'cause then you can have the fun of getting some more. I just love your hair fluffed out like that, she finished with a satisfied gaze. Don't you? Maybe. Still 'twon't last, with me tossing back and forth on the pillow as I do. Of course not, and I'm glad to, nodded Pollyanna cheerfully, because then I can fix it again. Anyhow, I should think you'd be glad it's black. Black shows up so much nicer on a pillow than yellow hair like mine does. Maybe, but I never did set much store by black hair. Shows gray too soon, retorted Mrs. Snow. She spoke fretfully, but she still held the mirror before her face. Oh, I love black hair. I should be so glad if I only had it, sighed Pollyanna. Mrs. Snow dropped the mirror and turned irritably. Well, you wouldn't. Not if you were me. You wouldn't be glad for black hair nor anything else, if you had to lie here all day as I do. Pollyanna bent her brows in a thoughtful frown. Why, 'twouldn't be kind of hard to do it then, wouldn't it? She mused aloud. Do what? Be glad about things. Be glad about things when you're sick in bed all your days. Well, I should say it would, retorted Mrs. Snow. If you don't think so, just tell me something to be glad about, that's all. To Mrs. Snow's unbounded amazement, Pollyanna sprang to her feet and clapped her hands. Oh, goody! That'll be a hard one, won't it? I've got to go now, but I'll think and think all the way home, and maybe the next time I come I can tell it to you. Goodbye. I've had a lovely time. Goodbye, she called again, as she tripped through the doorway. Well, I never. Now what does she mean by that? Ejaculated Mrs. Snow, staring after her visitor. By and by she turned her head and picked up the mirror, eyeing her reflection critically. That little thing has got a knack with the hair, and no mistake, she muttered under her breath. I declare, I didn't know it could look so pretty. But then, what's the use, she sighed, dropping the little glass into the bedclothes and rolling her head on the pillow fretfully. A little later, when Milly, Mrs. Snow's daughter, came in, the mirror still laying among the bedclothes, though it had been carefully hidden from sight. Why, Mother, the curtain is up, cried Milly, dividing her amazed stare between the window and the pink in her mother's hair. Well, what of it? Snapped the sick woman. I needn't stay in the dark all my life. If I'm sick, need I? Why, no, of course not, rejoined Milly hastily, as she reached for the medicine bottle. It's only, well, you know very well that I've tried to get you to have a lighted room for ages, and you wouldn't. There was no reply to this. Mrs. Snow was picking at the lace in her nightgown. At last she spoke fretfully. I should think somebody might give me a new night-dress instead of a lamb broth for a change. Why, Mother! No wonder Milly quite gasped aloud with bewilderment. In the drawer behind her at the moment lay 2 new night-dresses that Milly for months had been vainly urging her mother to wear. Chapter 9, which tells of the man. It rained the next time Polly saw the man. She greeted him, however, with a bright smile. It isn't so nice today, is it? She called blithesomely. I'm glad it doesn't rain always, anyhow. The man did not even grunt this time, nor turn his head. Pollyanna decided that of course he did not hear her. The next time, therefore, which happened to be the following day, she spoke up louder. She thought it particularly necessary to do this, anyway, for the man was striding along, his hands behind his back and his eyes on the ground, which seemed to Pollyanna preposterous in the face of the glorious sunshine and the freshly washed morning air. Pollyanna, as a special treat, was on a morning errand today. How do you do? She chirped. I'm so glad it isn't yesterday, aren't you? The man stopped abruptly. There was an angry scowl on his face. See here, little girl, we might just as well settle this thing right now, once and for all, he began testily. I've got something besides the weather to think of. I don't know whether the sun shines or not. Pollyanna beamed joyously. No, sir, I thought you didn't. That's why I told you. Yes, well, huh? What? He broke off sharply, in sudden understanding of her words. I say, that's why I told you, so you would notice it, you know. that the sun shines and all that. I know you'd be glad if it did, if you only stopped to think of it, and you didn't look a bit of as if you were thinking of it." "Well, of all the—" ejaculated the man with an oddly impotent gesture. He started forward again, but after the second step he turned back, still frowning. "See here, why don't you find someone your own age to talk to?" "I'd like to, sir, but there aren't any around here. Nancy says. Still, I don't mind so very much. I like old folks just as well, maybe better sometimes, being used to the Ladies' Aid so." "Humph! The Ladies' Aid, indeed. Is that what you took me for?" The man's lips were threatening to smile, but the scowl above them was still trying to hold them grimly stern. Pollyanna laughed gleefully. "Oh, no, sir, you don't look a mite like the Ladies' Aider. Not but that you've just as good, of course, maybe better," she added in hurried politeness. "You see, I'm sure you're much nicer than you look." The man made an odd noise in his throat. "Well, of all the—" he ejaculated again, as he turned and strode on as before. The next time Pollyanna met the man, his eyes were gazing straight into hers with a quizzical directness that made his face look really pleasant, Pollyanna thought. "Good afternoon," he greeted her a little stiffly. "Perhaps I'd be better to say right away that I know the sun is shining today." "But you don't have to tell me," nodded Pollyanna brightly. "I knew you knew it just as soon as I saw you." "Oh, you did you?" "Yes, sir. I saw it in your eyes, you know, and in your smile." "Humph!" grunted the man as he passed on. The man always spoke to Pollyanna after this, and frequently he spoke first, though, usually, he said little but good afternoon. Even that, however, was a great surprise to Nancy, who chanced to be with Pollyanna one day when the greeting was given. "Sakes alive, Miss Pollyanna," she gasped. "Did that man speak to you?" "Why, yes, he always does now," smiled Pollyanna. "He always does? Goodness, do you know who he is?" demanded Nancy. Pollyanna frowned and shook her head. "I reckon he forgot to tell me one day. You see, I did my part of introducing, but he didn't." Nancy's eyes widened. "But he never speaks to nobody, child. He hasn't for years, I guess, except when he just has to for business and all that. He's John Pendleton. He lives all by himself in the big house on Pendleton Hill. He won't even have anyone round to cook for him. Comes down to the hotel for his meals 3 times a day. I saw Sally Miner, who waits on him, and she says he hardly opens his head enough to tell her what he wants to eat. She has to guess it more'n half the time, only it'll be something cheap. She knows that without no tellin'." Pollyanna nodded sympathetically. "I know you have to look for cheap things when you're poor. Father and I took meals out a lot. We had beans and fish balls most generally. We used to say how glad we were we liked beans. That is, we used to, especially when we were looking at the roast turkey. You know, that was 60 cents. Does Mr. Pendleton like beans?" "Like 'em? What if he does, or don't?" "Why, Miss Pollyanna, he ain't poor. He's got loads of money. John Pendleton has, from his father. There ain't nobody in town as rich as he is. He could eat dollar bills if he wanted to, and not know it." Pollyanna giggled. "As if anybody could eat dollar bills and not know it, Nancy, when they came to try to chew 'em." "Oh, I mean he's rich enough to do it," struggled Nancy. "He ain't spending his money, that's all. He's a-shaving it off." "Oh, for the heathen," surmised Pollyanna. "How perfectly splendid. That's denying yourself and taking up your cross, I know. Father told me." Nancy's lips parted abruptly, as if there were angry words all ready to come out, but her eyes, resting on Pollyanna's jubilantly trustful face, saw something that prevented the words being spoken. "Humph," she vouchsafed. Then, showing her old-time interest, she went on, "But say, it is odd, his speaking to you, honestly. Miss Pollyanna. He don't speak ter no one, and he lives all alone in a great big lovely house, all full of just grand things, they say. Some say he's crazy, and some just cross, and some say he's got a skeleton in his closet. Oh, Nancy, shuddered Pollyanna, how can he keep such a dreadful thing? I should think he'd throw it away. Nancy chuckled that Pollyanna had taken the skeleton literally instead of figuratively. She knew very well, but perversely she refrained from correcting the mistake. And everybody says he's mysterious. She went on. Some years he just travels week in and week out, and it's always in heathen countries, Egypt and Asia and deserts of Sahara, you know. Oh, missionary, nodded Pollyanna. Nancy laughed oddly. Well, I didn't say that, Miss Pollyanna. When he comes back he writes books, odd books, they say, about some gimcracks he's found in that heathen country. But he don't never seem to want to spend no money here, leastways not for just livin'. Of course not, if he's saving it for the heathen, declared Pollyanna. But he is a funny man, and he's different, too, just like Mrs. Snow, only he's a different. Well, I guess he is, rather, chuckled Nancy. I'm gladder'n ever now, anyhow, that he speaks to me, sighed Pollyanna contentedly. And we will continue this story next Wednesday, and thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.